Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, like, comment, or share the link in the description.
The world of animation has seen numerous projects initiated with great promise, only to be shelved or canceled due to various reasons. These reasons can range from financial constraints, creative differences, to shifts in studio priorities. The list of the top 100 canceled animated movies represents a collection of such projects that sparked interest and excitement but never made it to the screen. Each entry on the list tells a story of ambition, creativity, and the often unpredictable nature of the film industry. While these films never saw the light of day, they remain a fascinating glimpse into what might have been in the ever-evolving landscape of animation. In 1998, Dreamworks and PDI had started development on this film, without being formally announced, as a parody of the Beatles, in a most likely animated mockumentary of their rise and fall to fame, which featured a Beatles-esque penguin rock band, but the idea was scrapped due to Dreamworks never getting the license to the Beatles songs. However, after production on Madagascar started, director Eric Darnell decided to revive the Penguins, but make them a commando unit instead of a rock band. Was really interesting was the film was later revamped into Penguins of Madagascar, released about 9 years after their debut in the first Madagascar film. Scoob! Holiday Haunt was a proposed prequel to the 2020 film Scoob, that was originally scheduled to be released on HBO Max on December 22, 2022. The story would follow 10-year-old Shaggy and the gang taking Scooby-Doo to celebrate his first Christmas to a holiday-themed resort owned by Fred's favorite Uncle Ned, when the park is beset by a ghostly haunting. The kids must solve a 40-year-old mystery to save the resort and show Scooby the true meaning of Christmas. This never made it to completion when Warner Bros. Discovery canceled its release along with Batgirl, citing cost-cutting measures and a refocus on theatrical films than creating projects for streaming. The Warner Bros. Discovery merger took place on April 8, 2022, resulting in many layoffs and shows leaving HBO Max. It's unknown when the special will be released, as it would been considered to be the second Hanna-Barbera Cinematic Universe film. In February 2015, Deadline reported that Warner Bros. And Cartoon Network Studios stated there was a possibility of a film adaptation based off the TV series Adventure Time, but the project never came to fruition. The Seven Dwarfs was a proposed CGI animated prequel to the Disney animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In the 2000s, Disney Toon Studios began development on a computer-animated prequel to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, titled simply The Seven Dwarfs. Director Mike Disa and screenwriter Evan Spiliotopoulos pitched a story explaining how the dwarfs met, how the evil queen took the throne from Snow White's father. The response to the film's pitch was overwhelmingly positive, and Disney Toons president Sharon Morrill agreed to Disa and Spiliotopoulos' vision for the prequel, giving them free rein. According to Disa, Disney Toon management changed the prequel to center around how Dopey lost his voice witnessing the death of his mother. Why did this prequel never got off the ground? Well, you can thank John Lasseter, as he became the CEO of Disney, which this led to all direct-to-DVD sequels and prequels, including The Seven Dwarfs, permanently cancelled. In 2015, it was announced that a Nicktoons live-action, animated crossover film was in the works, with Jared Hess as the director, the script being written by Hess and his wife, Joshua, and was going to be produced by Mary Parent and Cale Boyder, but in reality the film was not going to be made due to Paramount Pictures rejecting the film's pitch, despite its announcement. Can you imagine is a film from Sony Pictures Animation that was going to be written and directed by Jendy Tartakovsky, and was originally set to release on July 13, 2018. This movie would explore a fantastic journey through a boy's imagination. But it was cancelled, possibly due to Jendy Tartakovsky wanting to direct it. Hotel Transylvania 3, Summer Vacation. SpongeBob SquarePants, It's a Wonderful Sponge is the third movie in the franchise that was in development since 2014, a year before Sponge Out of Water was released. This movie went through several storylines: FRA and Atlanti plot, a alien cat plot, and an unknown third storyline plot that we didn't know what was about it. The film was significantly reworked into Sponge on the Run because the original story, which involved SpongeBob encouraging humans and alternate universes, was deemed too weird and different for a SpongeBob movie. This prompted the creators to shift to an origin story about SpongeBob's pet snail, Gary, instead. In the 1980s, a CGI animated film called The Works was in production, with contributions from Pixar and Dreamworks pioneers, and would have been the first ever 3D animated film in history, where the film sets in the future where a malfunctioning computer triggered a last world war, but it repopulates the entire planet with robots. Not long later, where it would have focused on an experienced pilot named T-Square and a robot named Ipso Facto, and the former would go to Earth to return humanity. But production difficulties defining on the traditional produced ink or work, and the developers had an extreme lack of interest to continue the progress of the film due to their computer systems being down, while the most powerful hardware at the time. They were too slow and underpowered to generate the number of images required for the film, and so with its cancellation, Toy Story, released in 1995, became the first CGI film in history. Chicken Little was originally planned to have sequels made after the first movie was released in 2005, the one being Mission to Mars and the other was The Ugly Duckling Story. But despite the box office success, the first film received negative reaction from critics and audiences, so Disney decided not make one. After the release of Monster House in 2006, plans for a sequel were announced, and Columbia Pictures, Relativity Media, Imagemovers, and Amblin Entertainment, in partnership with Sony Pictures Releasing, was in on it. An interview with Gil Cannon for Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, and he would like to do a sequel spin-off to Monster House. Gillard Cannon told comicbook.com in a recent interview, saying, and I quote, "Never say never isn't rolling it out either." 2006 movie. Gil Cannon told comicbook.com. But as unexpected, the script wasn't complete and some directors didn't know the plot specifically was. Oh well, only in time we'll never know what the Monster House sequel could have been like. In the mid to late 1990s, Universal Pictures planned on making a film adaptation of William Steig's Shrek book, with Chris Farley's voice proving the titular character, where the plot would have been the same as the finished film but would involve Shrek wanting to become a knight. But plans got backfired as Chris Farley died on December 18, 1997, before production was completed. As the Amblimation Studios closed down in 1997, the production was moved to Dreamworks Animation. And when Mike Myers came on board, the script was rewritten, and that's where the final version of Shrek was formed. In 2013, Arlene Klasky, Kate Baudelaire, current showrunner, and Alex Mesrobian devised the idea for a fourth Rugrats movie titled Rugrats in Space, said to be the most heartwarming Rugrats story ever told. But Nick turned down the idea, in exchange for bringing back the show itself. Larrikins is an animated film from Dreamworks Animation. It was set to be directed by Tim Minchin and Chris Miller, written by Harry Cripps, rigged by Peter DeSeve, Gabriella Panacchioli, Dave Weatherly, Alexis Wanaroy, Scott Lemmer, and Arjun Gadam, and to be produced by Christina Steinberg. It was originally set to be released on February 16, 2018, before its cancellation was announced on March 5, 2017. As according to most sources, the film itself just wasn't working out creatively and technically wasn't what test audiences thought it would be. Eventually, they thought the film wasn't matching with their creative differences. On March 5, 2020, Tim Minchin opened up about the true reason behind the film's cancellation while chatting to Richard Herring on his podcast, stating that after Universal acquired Dreamworks Animation, they canceled the film and used it as a write-off on their taxes since they had no faith in it performing, as well as their more established intellectual properties. And now, the film was shelved and no Dreamworks Animation films were released in 2018. Despite its cancellation, Dreamworks Animation released a short film called Bilby, which features characters from the cancelled movie. In the 1980s, a Garfield film called Garfield's Judgment Day was announced, and was scheduled to be released sometime between 1980 to 1990. The story would have been about a storm threatening to hit the town and Garfield proposing that the pets break their taboo of not talking to humans to warn them. However, no animation studio was willing to animate and fund the animation, due to how offset and dark they thought the story was, and some executives thought I did not grasp the appropriate and the original source material of the original Garfield comics. After unsuccessfully pitching it as a movie, Davis tried to rewrite it as a special, before eventually giving up and releasing it as a standalone picture book in 1990 of the same name and story, Garfield's Judgment Day. The Fairly OddParents movie was a planned animated film based on the TV series of the same name, but it was scrapped after Nickelodeon and Viacom changed presidents. Treasure Planet 2 was a sequel to the 2002 film Treasure Planet. It was intended to be directed by June Falkenstein and was going to have a release date for 2003 or 2004. The plot would be about Jim Hawkins and Kate. His love interest and classmate at the Royal Interstellar Academy must team up with Long John Silver to stop the villainous Ironbeard from freeing the inmates of Botany Bay Prison asteroid. But after the original film bombed at the box office while received great reviews, the sequel was cancelled along with the television series. My Peoples was a planned Disney film that was scheduled for a release in 2003, where it centers on a ghost and three children want to bring a pair of lovers from two opposing families in 1940s Appalachia back together. But Disney's hand-drawn division was ultimately shut down in late 2003, along with the Florida studio, and the marketing became too difficult. So the movie was turned down and scrapped in favor of Chicken Little, where upon its release, it got panned by fans and critics. Alice in Wonderland was originally planned to be released in 1939, where this pitch was what originally looked like and played out very differently. But this version has been considered very dark for an animated film, as Wonderland's denizens were monstrous and brutal. For example, the Mad Hatter and March Hare were going to slice off Alice's legs with scissors and knives. Hostile birds and even the Queen of Hearts is going to kill Alice with a realistic guillotine in the end. Hanging corpses, discarded skulls, and instruments of torture all feature. Yeah. And to make things worse, that is very hard to make it animated as it will cost too much money. With the artwork was very grotesquely monstrous and detailed. Talk about too much nightmare fuel, so it was scrapped as it was replaced with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And 12 years later, Disney finally released Alice in Wonderland with a new and well-known version in 1951. It was a lot denser, wackier, lighter, and softer compared to the darker and edgier tone to the The Land Before Time 15 was the proposed sequel to The Land Before Time 14, Journey of the Brave, and the 15th installment in the Land Before Time film series. It was supposed to be released in 2019, but nothing came about for the 15th movie. The Nut Job 3 is a sequel that would have been the third installment for the series. It would have possibly involved the gang taking on Norvirus Raccoon, the villain from the first film, who returns to the park to take revenge, as seen in the post-credits. But the first film and sequel did not receive the best reception, and Toonbox Entertainment had given away their equipment and went bankrupt. In October 2020, Toonbox Entertainment announced that a television series based on the film titled Nut Jobs was in development, but as of 2025, nothing else came from it. Popeye was a proposed film that was going to be made by Sony Pictures Animation based on the famous cartoon character Popeye created by C. Cigar. The film was to be directed by Genndy Tartakovsky, the creator of Samurai Jack and Dexter's Laboratory and writer for the Powerpuff Girls. Its production began in 2010, and it would be released at some point in 2016, where the plot would be about Popeye trying to find his father. But the movie wasn't made, due to the 2014 Sony hack along with creative differences. And Genndy Tartakovsky would have felt that the movie wouldn't do well enough if the film was made. Aladdin 4 was a planned fourth part in the original Aladdin franchise. The plot was supposedly supposed to take place a few years or many years after the events of The King of Thieves. But after Robin Williams died in 2014, the film was cancelled. Big Bug Man is the 2000s American animated movie that was going to star Brendan Fraser and the late Marlon Brando, before his passing on July 1, 2000 due to respiratory failure while the film was in production. The plot would involve a candy factory worker named Howard Kind, who after being bitten by many bugs, turns into a superhero known as Big Bug Man. The film was set for release in 2006, then 2007, and then 2008, and on until its release date became unknown, making everyone thinking it never made it past the development stage, despite it being shown on the news.
Saying goodbye to the Don. Most of us will remember Marlon Brando as the larger-than-life, raspy-voiced Don Corleone in The Godfather. But in his last movie, which has not yet been released yet, he played a role that will surely surprise. Donna Tatro has the story of the Marlon Brando you didn't know.
I speak not to this.
It will forever be remembered as Marlon Brando's last performance, but it's not what you think.
He gave me all of Judy's records. Same pills, too. I'm somewhere over the rainbow right now.
It's Brando as a woman, Mrs. Sauer, in the animated film Big Bug Man, set to release in 2006. It's about the last moral person in the world who becomes a superhero and how celebrity, wealth, and fame corrupts him. Sounds perfect for the screen idol who rejected the Hollywood star treatment.
Ants 2 was a planned direct-to-video sequel to the 1998 film Ants that was also considered for a theatrical release. But in early 1999, Dreamworks closed its television animation unit and merged the direct-to-video unit with the feature animation. And the movie also debated with Pixar over the ripoff of their other movie, A Bug's Life. And not only that, but Woody Allen hated playing the role of the film's protagonist along with allegations against him. The Search for Mickey Mouse was a planned animated film from Disney that was announced to commemorate Mickey Mouse's 75th birthday. The premise is that Mickey Mouse was kidnapped by unknown forces, forcing Minnie Mouse to enlist Basil of Baker Street to investigate his disappearance. Along the way, they encounter one character from Disney's animated film canon, including Alice, Peter Pan, Robin Hood, and Aladdin. After the film was announced, no new info was released about the film. This caused many people to believe that the film was cancelled. In an unknown day in 2005, it was announced that it would be released in 2012 as Disney's 50th animated feature. When the time came, Tangled became Disney's 50th animated feature in 2010. It was unknown if the project was still alive or completely cancelled. The Good Dinosaur had an original version where this film was announced with Bob Peterson as director and a slightly different story compared to the final version, with a lot of differences from this version from the final film. While not much is known, but the little has been disclosed was that dinosaurs would be agricultural and Alla will be fascinated by insects. One day, Alla would find a giant beetle, which would actually be the human child Spot. Then they would embark on a journey in which nature would be a negative antagonist. But then, Bob Peterson and John Walker were removed from their posts due to problems with the story. Peter Zone and Denise Ream eventually replaced Peterson and Walker, while the former went from co-director to director. Due to this, the story underwent changes. Its release got moved from 2014 to 2015, and they changed almost the entire original cast, of which Frances McDormand was the only voice actor who remained in the final film. And Pixar found it necessary to do this in order to come up with a good story for near future projects of theirs. Boo! Bureau of Otherworldly Operations was the title of an American computer-animated supernatural action comedy film to be made by Dreamworks Animation and Pacific Data Images. It is based on an original idea and directed by Tony Leondis. Tom Wheeler was said to be writing the script, with Marianne Garger as producer and Courtney Pledger as executive producing. The film would have starred Seth Rogen, Matt Bomer, Melissa McCarthy, Bill Murray, Octavia Spencer, Rashida Jones, and Jennifer Coolidge, and would have been released on June 5, 2015 by 20th Century Fox. The plot for Boo Bureau of Otherworldly Operations is the super classified agency you're never heard of and certainly never seen, dedicated to protecting humans from evil hauntings. The agents of Boo have a secret weapon. They are ghosts themselves. Newbie agents Jackson Moss and his oddball partner, Watts, uncover a plot to destroy Boo by the agency's most wanted haunter. They must use every trick in their arsenal to defeat his powerful ghost army and save Earth from a ghostly fate. Dreamworks set for release in November 6, 2015, but moved a few months later to September 25 in 2013. The film was rescheduled for release on June 5, 2015, but it was pulled from its release to avoid competition with Disney and Pixar's Inside Out in January 2015. To this day, Boo is still technically on the shelf and unlikely to see the light of day. The fact it has received no production updates from cast or crew members since, and that the film's official website was taken down in late 2019 suggests the film may have been cancelled. "I think it was a really good movie," says Tim. "It had a unique look. You become proud of these stories. But you're got to let the anger go. We're being hired to make a product and of course I'm disappointed. I'm frustrated. I would have loved to have the movie eventually be released. But we never got to finish it either. It's hard to say what that finished version would have ended up as." Initially, after the release of the direct-to-video film Disney Princess Enchanted Tales, Follow Your Dreams, there was to be an entire series of Enchanted Tales direct-to-video film installments. While the other plots are unknown, but it would have been based around the rest of the other princesses, like Mulan and Cinderella. But Disney Toon Studios president Sharon Morrill stepped down in June 2007, and the animation studio units under the Walt Disney Company underwent corporate restructuring as the Pixar leadership assumed more control. And after John Lasseter called off all future direct-to-DVD sequels, the film series was cancelled. On the Nickelodeon's official Instagram account, the studio announced that they were going to be making a new Rugrats movie set for a release date of November 13, 2020 along with the 2021 reboot. It was confirmed that the film would be a live-action NGCI animated hybrid unlike the previous 3 films, and David Bowers was gonna direct. However, due to unknown reasons, the film was pushed back to January 29, 2021 before it was pulled from Paramount's release schedule on November 12, 2019. It was speculated that due to the overwhelming praise of the Sonic the Hedgehog trailer,
Meow?
Paramount decided to remove 2 upcoming live-action CGI hybrid movies from their release schedule. One of those movies was the Rugrats movie. As part of Aardman Animation's 5-picture deal with Dreamworks Animation, an animated film called Crude Awakening, an adaptation of the book called The Twits by Roald Dahl in Caveman Times, was in the early works at Aardman. The film was written by John Cleese and Kirk D'Amico. The premise of the film would have been loosely based on the Roald Dahl book but set in the Stone Age. But unfortunately, Dreamworks ended the partnership after the box office failure of Flushed Away and executive meddling from DreamWorks. However, despite all that, DreamWorks made their Stone Age film in 2013 with The Croods, where Cleese and D'Amico were heavily involved. 5 years later, Aardman made Early Man in 2018, with both films made after this original idea. Mistress Massam's Repose was a film based on the 1946 novel of the same name by T.H. White that was being developed at Disney in the 1980s by Joe Hale, a veteran Disney animator who would eventually produce The Black Cauldron. Animator Andreas Dea did some preliminary character designs for it. The plot would have been the same as the book, which follows Maria, a 10-year-old orphan girl who lives on a derelict family estate, with her only companions being a loving family cook and a retired professor of ancient Latin, to try to protect Maria from her strict governess Miss Brown, who takes her cue from Maria's guardian, a vicar named Mr. Hayter. Meeting the Lilliputians and being tempted to love, to fear and to bully, Maria must save her friends and herself. But the film never got made as Jeffrey Katzenberg hates the idea, and so the movie was replaced by The Black Cauldron in 1985. Shortly after 20th Century Fox bought Blue Sky Studios, the studio planned on making their first feature film that was going to be an animated adaptation of the children's book Santa Claus by author William Joyce. It follows Santa Claus asking 3 gifted children to help him defeat an army of dark elves and save Christmas. But difficulties improved on the CGI animation along with some problems in production, where the movie is replaced by Ice Age as Blue Sky's first feature film. Me and My Shadow, or Edgar Wright's Shadow, was a planned animated film produced by Dreamworks Animation, and it was meant to combine traditional and CGI animation. Daniel Grubb Josh Gad, the world's most boring and dull man, has a shadow named Dan Bill Hader who wants more excitement but can't have it because he's attached to Daniel. When Dan uncovers a criminal plot in the shadow world that involves an evil shadow who wants to lead a rebellion to take over the human world, he decides to take control of Daniel to give him a glimpse of adventure and to also stop the shadow villain from leading the rebellion. The two of them goes onto an adventure throughout the shadow world to investigate the situation and face the villain before the villain and the shadows set out to the human world to take control of their humans. But in February 2013, the movie went back into development with Mr. Peabody and Sherman reassuming its original March 2014 release. As of now, the movie is in limbo due to management changes at Dreamworks Animation. The Billion Brick Race was going to be a computer-animated film by Warner Animation Group and Lego, which it was going to be the third spin-off film in the Lego Movie franchise and was slated to be released on May 24, 2019. But trouble occurs when Jorge R. Gutierrez, who replaced Drew Pearce as the director of the film, abandoned the project on February 11, 2018 to pursue other opportunities. And reasonably, both the Lego Ninjago Movie and the Lego Movie 2, the second part, underperformed at the box office, causing Warner Bros. to end their movie deal with Lego in December 2019, with Universal acquiring the rights in April 2020 with the Lego racing movie dead in its tracks. In the 1980s, Disney considered making a film about ants protecting their colony in military style, where this movie is called Army Ants, but the idea never fully materialized. However, the idea of a film about anthropomorphic ants would eventually be used in Ants and A Bug's Life, both films coming out in 1998, 10 years after this idea was thought through. In 2009, it was announced that Illumination Entertainment was currently in the process of creating a film based on the children's book Flanimals by Ricky Gervais of The Office fame. It was supposed to be Illumination Entertainment's first feature-length film, where the story focuses on 50 species of creatures are so ugly and misshapen they become cute and endearing. One of these creatures, a pudgy, perspiring purple creature, goes on a mission to change the world. Gervais himself was confirmed to be the executive producer as well as the voice of the main character. Also that The Simpsons writer Matt Selman would write the script back in 2009. But the film was cancelled, while it's unknown why. But it can be assumed, however, that the designs were simply too creepy for young children. With the Flanimals movie shelved, in 2010, Despicable Me was instead Illumination Entertainment's first feature-length movie. A planned animated adaptation of Roald Dahl's book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was in the planning stages but was never made. Kingdom of the Sun is the original version of The Emperor's New Groove. It was supposed to be directed by Roger Allers. It was originally scheduled to be released in December 2000 before The Emperor's New Groove took the release date, with Randy Fulmer as producer. Then supervising animator Andreas Dea joined the production, who was in charge of the witch character of Yzma, and pop musician Sting, who, in the wake of Elton John's success with the Lion King soundtrack, has been assigned to write several songs for the film. The film would see Prince Manco switching places with a llama herder named Pasha. A witch named Yzma figured it out and turned Manco into a llama. She later decides to blot the sun into darkness with the darkness god Supai. But how did this movie got remade into the movie we know of? Well, the reason is that test audiences didn't like the prince and the pauper storyline and how dark most of the story was. Some felt Sting's songs were too experimental. And so with Roger Allers stepping down as director and Sting's songs were scrapped with new songs, the movie was rewritten and reworked into The Emperor's New Groove with Mark Dindal as the new director. After the release of the film, the creators of Rise of the Guardians expressed hope that the strong cinema score average for the film and an enthusiastic word of mouth would gather support for the chance to make a sequel or two. Author and co-producer of the series, William Joyce, also mentioned in March 2013 that he was still in talks about a sequel with Dreamworks Animation. There is something that we are proposing that we hope they will want to do. However, Despite positive reviews and being nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Academy Awards, the film underperformed at the box office. And Paramount and Dreamworks lost money due to the film's box office returns. And as a result, the sequel was cancelled permanently and the first film was left as a one-off Guardian story. Mulan 3 was a planned sequel to the 1998 film and the 2005 sequel Mulan 2. It was planned for a 2007 release. With it being set a few months after Mulan 2, Fa Mulan must help a Chinese maiden named Wei Chue to save her father Wu Taxai, who is imprisoned in Japan. But due to the rise of 3D animation overtaking traditional animation, the third movie was scrapped. In the early 2000s, there were plans for an adaptation of Rapunzel. It was supposed to have a mix of CGI and 2D animation. It was originally a comedy parody film in the same flavor as DreamWorks' Shrek. The story follows a witch named Lucretia despises happy endings and two teenagers who do not really like each other named Vince and Claire would later put their differences aside and team together to defeat Lucretia. But most of the cancellation reasons are currently unknown, though it's rumored that it was due to Michael Eisner leaving Disney in 2005. Because of this, the project was changed back to a traditional film. Glenn Keane left the project during mid-production because of non-life-threatening health issues. So the genre switched from a comedy parody film to a traditional musical film. Its 2007 release was also moved to 2010, which this led to Tangled getting made. In the 2000s, a mockumentary film under the title of A Day with SpongeBob SquarePants. The movie was announced by a company called Regal Films and also MVD, who would have distributed the film, and it originally was set to be released in 2011. The official website of Regal Films via retellings in specific YouTube videos and web archives gives a premise to the film. In this mockumentary, SpongeBob lives above ground like all Hollywood superstars. Afraid that SpongeBob is becoming old news, his boss runs a contest called Spend a Day with SpongeBob. The contest makes SpongeBob the talk of the town, as thousands of kids enter to win. The lucky winner is Seth, and he is ecstatic about his day with SpongeBob. However, the day becomes a roller coaster ride as things do not go quite the way they planned. Development kicked around the 2000s. The film was announced, set to release sometime in 2011, postponed multiple times, and was planned to be a direct-to-DVD mockumentary documentary. The filmmaker, who is pseudonymized Mr. Orange for privacy reasons, wanted to create a family movie that pays tribute to the John Hughes films he watched as he grew up. He wrote a script and approached various filmmakers, including Jonathan Salami, who was involved in several of Regal's films. Nevertheless, after talks with Salami and many others at Regal, it was decided that the film was going beyond the budget that would be given to Mr. Orange. Mr. Orange also initially refused to make the film out of fear of Nickelodeon and Viacom's legal concerns. However, after a consultation with a lawyer, he was told to make the film if it were a parody. It would also help if it were live action and acknowledged that it was entirely unofficial. Mr. Orange set out to create the pitch cover for suppliers and manufacturers after speaking with his attorney. He requested Jorge Pacheco, an illustrator, to produce a drawing similar to the famous Pineapple House. After the positive reception of his pitch cover, Regal Films offered to help him by uploading it to Amazon to see if there is any demand via pre-orders. During pre-production, the movie was given a barcode. However, the development of the film was still faced with financial problems. On August 3, 2016, it was announced that a crowdfunding effort would be launched in September of that year to produce the movie. However, the crowdfunding effort has not yet been made as of 2025. So, why didn't it happen? When a lawsuit by Viacom and Nickelodeon went through much of the film's troubled production, and the creators of ADWSS were sued for copyright, alongside financial problems. But the director of the film, Mr. Orange, planned to revive the film with a crowdfunding effort. However, this fact has been proven false. We never know how this documentary film would be made as of this time. Only time would tell. Foot Fight is the worst animated film of all time, but the original version is a bit closer to what we have now. The plot of Foot Fight was supposed to be like Toy Story in a supermarket, as the plot was about a supermarket that came to life when the store closed. In 1997, Lawrence Kasanoff and Joshua Wexler created the concept of Food Fight. And later the film went into development at Threshold Animation Studios. Around 2004, it was reported that the hard drives containing the film had been stolen. Threshold said it was an act of industrial espionage. However, this claim has been greatly disputed by the fan documentary Rotten, in which crew members exhibit skepticism of this ever happening, hinting it was all a lie to continue missing deadlines without much consequence. Only a sizzle reel and other pre-production work like art and storyboards were made before production shifted to motion capture animation, which later became the version we knew today. Hercules 2. The Trojan War or just Hercules 2 is a sequel to the 1997 film that was scheduled for a 2001 release. It was supposed to take place sometime after Hercules, the animated series. It was revealed in October 2001 that Ron Clements and John Musker were interested in a sequel, where Hercules, now living in Athens with Megara and their daughter, Hebe. However, when an old friend named Helen is captured by the evil Paris of Troy, Hercules joins the united Greek army as they head out to war. However, this war will create revelations, and Hercules finds an old friend who eventually goes missing. But as expected, due to the proposal phase not being finished, the project never materialized. The Legend of Zelda is an animated film adaptation of Nintendo's video game series and franchise of the same name, which was supposed to be released by fellow studio Imagi Studios, where the plot would follow the same story as the games. But Imagi Studios shut down production and went out of business due to the box office failure of the 2009 Astro Boy film. Not to mention that Nintendo rejected the pitch due to the failure of the live-action film adaptation of Super Mario Bros. In 1993, which came out 15 years ago. Jimmy Neutron 2. The Search for Carl was a planned sequel to the 2001 film Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius. The plot was written by writer Kate Baudelaire. The plot is unknown, but it was described that the sequel would be made on the same budget as the first, but with a new batch of inventions and adventures in Jimmy's town of Retroville. But the film was cancelled because the writers could not agree on a story, and Alcorn later stated in an interview that once the TV series came out, there wasn't a lot of incentive to make a movie when fans could simply watch Jimmy Neutron for free at home. And due to the failure of Rugrats Go Wild, the sequel was scrapped. Lego Super Friends was planned sequel to the Lego Batman movie that would have been a future installment in the Lego movie franchise, with Chris McKay returning to direct the film and the script being written by Michael Waldron and Dan Harmon. With the film set for release in 2022, where according to Chris McKay, the sequel would have focused on Batman's relationship with the Justice League, particularly Superman, and the main villains would have been Lex Luthor and Olmec. It was set to based on the 1937 to 1985 DC Comics-based animated series Super Friends, as well as loosely based on the 1997 film Boogie Nights. But although the Lego Batman movie received positive reviews from critics and audiences and was successful at the box office, both the Lego Ninjago movie and the Lego Movie 2, the second part underperformed at the box office, causing Warner Bros. To end off their movie deal with Lego in December 2019, leading to the sequel's cancellation because DC Comics is owned by Warner Bros. Before Sony owned the Smurfs franchise, Nickelodeon Movies and Paramount Pictures were making a planned trilogy based in Peyo's characters that were announced in 2006. The original draft was described as an epic comedic fantasy. Like The Lord of the Rings meets The Princess Bride and Shrek, the history of this trilogy would focus on the origin of the Smurfs and the backstory of Gargamel. Similar to the Star Wars prequel trilogy 1999 to 2005. But none of it never got a chance to make its way to the finish line as Sony bought the rights of the Smurfs, making it into the 2011 film of the same name. While a commercial success, it was given negative reviews from critics and fans of the franchise. However, after the film, sequel and reboot, Paramount Animation partners up with Laughing Belgium and IMPS to make multiple animated movies based on the Smurfs. The first Smurfs movie was released on July 18, 2025, to being a critical and financial failure. Metro is a Disney movie that would have been another Cars spin-off after Planes and would focus on subway trains, where it's scheduled for a 2021 release. But it proves very difficult to have a train as a protagonist. Unlike cars, buses, trucks, planes, helicopters or boats, trains cannot move freely and only move where the rails take them. Some people could have accused the movie for plagiarizing Thomas and Friends, Chuggington, Crash Bandicoot or Titipo Titipo. And Disney Toon Studios was shut down on June 28, 2018. And so, with Metro movie cancelled, Cars and Planes were the only two series that would exist in its own universe. Rio 3 is a Blue Sky Studios movie. It was going to be the third installment in the Rio saga. Shortly after Rio 2, in 2014, the director of the first and second films, Carlos Saldanha, stated the following in an interview. "It's a little early, granted. I want to see how Rio is accepted by the audience, and how people take this sequel. Of course, I have a lot of stories to tell, so we're starting to prepare for it, because we love these characters so much, and there are a lot of things in my head that maybe I couldn't put in the movie. I wanted to take them to a different place, so I don't know yet. We'll see what happens." This reveals that there were actually plans to make Rio 3, however, apart from what was declared by Carlos Saldanha and in part by other members of the cast interviewed. It is unknown if other members of Blue Sky Studios have stated anything about the sequel. Well, this becomes uncertain as Blue Sky Studios closed down on April 2021 due to the failures of Ice Age, Collision Course, Ferdinand, and Spies in Disguise, making the film not been made until now. However, Jim Hecht was confirmed to write a script for a new Rio installment in January 2022 after the release of the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild and set for release on Disney+. However, no other details have been announced yet. It is possible this is related to the previously rumored spin-off starring Nico and Pedro. Former Blue Sky Studios member Lubomir Arsov made two storyboards and an animatic storyboard of Rio 3 which were posted on his website. These were created before the studio's closure. Arsov stated that these storyboards are ideas of what the third film would have looked like. Monsters Inc. 2, Lost in Scaradise was originally a sequel to Monsters Inc. It was going to make BT Circle 7 animation instead of Pixar and would revolve around Mike and Sully going to the human world to see Boo in time for her birthday. However, they instead find an old woman in her room. Trapped in the human world, Mike and Sully must embark on a quest to find her and return home to their world. But in early 2006, it was decided that Disney would be better off owning Pixar altogether rather than just the franchises. As a result, Circle 7 animation was shut down, thus canceling the drafts of Toy Story, Monsters Inc., and Finding Nemo. Eventually, the two got sequels made by Pixar, while Monsters Inc. got a prequel in 2013. On July 30, 2010, shortly after the release of their first film, Despicable Me, it was announced that Illumination Entertainment was developing another animated film based on the book, Curious George. The plot would possibly be the same as the book, with Frank Welker proving the vocal effects of Curious George. But Illumination rejected the pitch as they don't want to make any more live-action films due to the negative reaction to Hop, Illumination's second feature film, and the studio want to focus on the Despicable Me franchise, so this movie faded into obscurity. There was an early Circle 7 animation screenplay version of the Disney and Pixar film Toy Story 3. Steve Jobs, who was at the time the head of Disney, announced in early 2004 that the Walt Disney Company had decided not to renew its contract with Pixar. However, Michael Eisner stated that he was fine with the idea because he believed that the company could produce sequels to Pixar's films that would be just as good as the originals. Eisner decided to create a new animation studio in Glendale, California, and chose to produce sequels to various Pixar movies, in addition to creating screenplays for sequels to Monsters Inc. and Finding Nemo. The animators at Circle 7 also began developing ideas for a third Toy Story film. Among the rejected ideas was a script written by teachers' pet writers Bill and Sherry Steinkellner that involved Woody and the gang finding toys that had been stolen out of Andy's grandmother's attic in a whodunit-style mystery. But finally, Disney chose a draft that had been submitted by Jim Herzfeld. However, the studio wanted it to be written and handed it to Bob Hilgenberg and Rob Muir, who wrote the script for the sequel to Monsters, Inc., Rick Sluter. Jim Martin and Shane Zalvin created the concept art. This plot might have taken place before Pixar's version of Toy Story 3. Here's the plot. When Buzz Lightyear starts to malfunction, the toys decide to ship him to the Waka Waka factory in Taiwan, where Buzz was created. Buzz got sent there against his will after accidentally injuring Andy. However, Woody and the gang discover that all Buzz Lightyears are getting recalled due to them malfunctions as well. Fearing their Buzz will be replaced or destroyed, they ship themselves to save Buzz. Speaking of which, the Space Ranger toy would meet other recalled toys, as well as encountering a new version of himself called Dax Blaster. However, things will go south for Woody and the gang, as their trek to reach Buzz will not be easy. But that never happened, as in January 2006, Disney bought Pixar, and ultimately closed Circle 7 Studios, where this version is scrapped and a new version was produced and scratched by Pixar, and released in 2010. Pixie Hollow Games was originally intended as the last of 5 feature-length films in the Tinker Bell series of direct-to-DVD 3D animated films, with the title Tinker Bell, Race Through the Seasons, and a release date in 2012. However, the movie was rescheduled and retooled as a TV special instead of a feature-length movie. American Dog is a Disney film written and directed by Chris Sanders and was supposed to be released in 2007. The story involves a dog named Henry stars in his own show where he's a secret agent. While he was in his show, something goes wrong and Henry blacks out. He then wakes up into Nevada desert, 2,000 miles away from his home. It's up to Henry and some friends, including a one-eyed cat with an eye patch and a large rabbit along the way, to either make it back home or find a new one. But this movie considered too bizarre for children, so Chris Sanders was kicked out of the team during the film's production, where the film was reworked into the 2008 Disney film Walt. As for Chris Sanders, he left Disney completely and joined Dreamworks to direct the 2010 film How to Train Your Dragon. Tinker Bell, Tinker Academy is the 7th movie in the Tinker Bell film series. The story would have centered around Tinker Bell going to the titular school and meeting a new group of fairies called City Tinkers, with the most prominent one being a fairy named Ember. As Disney had plans for a 7th film, The Hollywood Reporter stated that the 7th film was cancelled due to story problems alongside with the diminishing popularity of the Disney Fairies franchise. But a storyboard of the opening scene shows that the movie would have begun as a flashback to the beginning of the first movie from Fairy Mary's perspective, in which she was supposed to leave for Tinker Academy, but saw Tinker Bell's arrival and talent and decided to stay to teach her, sacrificing her dream of attending the school. Atlantis 2, Shards of Chaos was the original proposed direct-to-video sequel to 2001's Atlantis, The Lost Empire. But due to the movie's poor box office performance due to competing against Shrek and Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, Shards of Chaos was scrapped and replaced with another direct-to-video movie called Milo's Return that was 3 episodes used from the unfinished television series, which was a critical failure. Gigantic was a planned computer-animated musical comedy film produced by Walt Disney Animation Studios, revealed during the 2015 D23, and distributed by Walt Disney Motion Pictures. Set in Spain during the Age of Exploration, the film would follow Jack as he discovers a world of giants hidden within the clouds, where Jack befriends the female giant Inma, who's 11 years old, 60 feet tall, fiery, feisty and a lot of control and treats him like a living doll, Greno said. Meanwhile, the antagonists, storm giants, stand at 120 feet. Nathan Greno and Meg Lafave were set to direct it, and it was initially scheduled to be the 59th animated feature in the Disney animated canon, following the release of Frozen 2 in November 2019, but on October 10, 2017, Disney announced that the project has been cancelled due to creative differences, according to Ed Catmull, and was replaced by Raya and the Last Dragon. Wildlife was a CGI film directed by Howard Baker and Roger Gould that was being developed at the Walt Disney Company in the late 1990s, where the story would be about a nightclub owner and a rival magazine editor plotting to discredit each other by passing off a talented, talking baby elephant named Ella as the next pop superstar. But the plan backfired when the public adored Ella, It was to have been a satire of 70s American pop culture and would have paid homage to popular figures at the time such as Andy Warhol, Anna Wintour and Diana Vreeland, and would have been loosely based on George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion. The cast would include Alan Cumming, Kathy Bates, and Deborah Messing being considered as the voice of Kitty Glitter. But the movie suffered major story problems throughout development, which hindered its changes of entertaining pre-production. This was due to initial pushback against its initial vision as an adult-centric feature, causing the story to lose its identity. The animation studio making the film, The Secret Lab, shut down in 2000 after the release of Dinosaur. Along with the film failing to make progress, Wildlife was shelved and officially cancelled in 2000. There were plans to make sequels to the 2007 CGI Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film, where one of the sequels had Michelangelo feeling not taken seriously by his brothers, and joins the Foot, while the others ventured to Japan to battle Kari, resulting in the return of the Shredder. Another involved Donatella, causing the return of the Triceratons and the Technodrome. Why are the sequels cancelled? Well, Viacom, now Paramount, acquired the Ninja Turtle franchise in 2009. But the only known reason for its cancellation is because Imagi Animation Studios closed down in February 2010 following the box office failure of Astro Boy, so no sequels for TMNT. Roger Rabbit 2. The Toon Platoon was a prequel to the 1988 film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where it would have been a direct-to-video musical film. The first draft of the script was completed on May 22, 1989. But it is unknown if there was a later draft. However, it has been recently discovered that there is a second draft, dated October 30, 1990. The title has been revised to Roger Rabbit 2, Who Discovered Roger Rabbit. Nat Malden, Tony Sheehan, and Jeff Stein are all listed as writers. As for the plot, it sets in 1941. It would have had Roger expose the manager of the radio station that Jessica works at as a Nazi spy, but Steven Spielberg objected to the film's portrayal of Nazis and refused to take part of the project. And Disney lost the licenses to Warner Brothers and Hanna-Barbera characters due to the formation of Time Warner at the time. But there was one attempt to revive the film in 1998, but that never materialized, but test animation was made, however.
So what do you think, big fella?
Our Real Monsters was an animated Nickelodeon television show that aired from October 1994 until cancellation in December 1997. When the show was ending, Klasky Zupo planned on making a film based on the series. However, it is unknown what relation to the cartoon series was intended for the movie. It could have been the series finale or just made into a TV movie. Production began around 1998, however, it was cancelled as a result for being deemed too dark. There have been multiple people on various internet chat forums who claim to have seen parts of the film. Despite this, there has not been any visual leaks of the movie. There are articles on TV sites listing the movie as unaired and TV.com as aired Sunday 9:30 p.m. unknown on Nickelodeon. The first time this movie was acknowledged to exist was in 2009, 11 years after its production year. Since then, rumors about the movie have circulated around the internet, growing very little information over the years. Evidence of the existence of this film is limited. TV.com and other sites have said that the only references about the movie are to Yahoo Answers questions and fan scripts of what the film may have been like, as the plot was never released. A 2010 film guide was found online for sale and lists the Our Real Monsters movie, along with a variety of other titles. It is currently unknown what other information the book holds about the film, and there are currently no scans from the film on the internet as of right now. The Gremlins was a planned Disney film, based on the 1943 Roald Dahl book. The plot would have the mythical gremlins getting blamed for causing mechanical problems for pilots in the British Air Force during World War II. But Warner Brothers released the Bugs Bunny short Falling Hair the same year as using the same premise. But mostly reasonably, World War II, the main setting of the film, was coming to an end, where an oversaturation of war films during the film's planned release prompted its cancellation. but 2 screenplays were written, and a promotional nook was released before the project was put aside. And one of the characters, Gremlin Gus, appears as a guide to Mickey Mouse in the game Epic Mickey release for the Nintendo Wii in 2010, where in the game, Gus is found in the cartoon Wasteland, a home for all things forgotten. He resides here with many other gremlins from the scrap film. A Tin Toy Christmas is a television special from Pixar, which would have been the follow-up to Tin Toy, 'cause after the success of the short film, Pixar started doing commercials for television and by 1989 stated planning the idea for a holiday special, with the hopes of working their way up to making a feature film, which is what Ed Catmull dreamed of one day doing, where the storyline has Tinny being one of a set of tin toys in the 1940s that performed music, but is put away in storage because he didn't sell very well. After being asleep for many years, he finally wakes up in the present time and finds himself in a huge megastore during Christmas. Tinny then goes on a search to find his old friends, along the way meeting a ventriloquist dummy and a juckman. However, it turned out that they didn't have the budget to get it made because the network they pitched it to wouldn't give them enough money. After the idea was shelved for 2 years, John Lasseter took it out again and began expanding it to feature-length when Pixar was hired by Disney to make for them an animated feature, which ended up evolving into Toy Story. When the story was being reworked into the storyline for Toy Story, Tinny's role was replaced with that of Buzz Lightyear, and the ventriloquist dummy character became Woody. There was also a penguin character that ended up being used in Toy Story 2's Wheezy, and a bear that became Lotso in Toy Story 3 as stated in the official movie magazine for Toy Story 3. The ending of Toy Story taking place on Christmas, and Tinny being put into storage became a concept used for Jessie. In the 1930s, an animated Mickey Mouse film called Morgan's Ghost was in the works at Disney, and was originally scheduled to release in 1939, where it's announced in, or around, the 1930s, it were to be scripted by Dirk Creedon and Al Perkins, where it would follow Mickey, Donald, and Goofy in a pirate treasure hunt with a parrot named Yellowback and the ghost of Captain Morgan, who helps them find the real treasure after the villainous Pete kidnaps Yellowback. But because of a conflict with World War II, the Walt Disney Company's priorities had to change, and this almost drove the Walt Disney Company to went into bankruptcy. In 1941, Oscar Liebeck, managing director at Western Publishing, asked Disney to adapt the shelved Morgan's Ghost storyboards into something more, where this got revolved into Donald Duck Finds Pirate Gold, was published in Dell Comics for Color No. 9 in 1942, though it bears very little resemblance to Morgan's Ghost. Tusker was a planned animated feature from Dreamworks and Pacific Data Images PDI. It was to be directed by Tim Johnson and Brad Lewis, the respected co-director and producer of Ants, and was to be the company's third CGI film after the latter and Shrek. The plot would follow Tusker as he follows a herd of elephants as they set out on a Great Escape-inspired impossible mission, making a trek across Southeast Asia while encountering poachers and other dangers. The protagonist would have been a young elephant whose journey of discovery, heroism and redemption intersected with and renewed the life of a reclusive old elephant who had always been an outsider. The film was announced in December 1998, with Katzenberg describing the movie as an action comedy. It is very much an homage to the classic World War II films such as The Dirty Dozen or The Guns of Navarone, in which a band of screw-ups have to go on an impossible mission in order to save the rest of the herd. In March 1999, animators and the directors spent time at an elephant preserve in Nashville, TN, to study the physical mannerisms as well as the personalities of elephants. A year later, in May 2000, Jeffrey Katzenberg traveled to Asia for work related to this project. Jodie Foster and Morgan Freeman's involvement in Tusker was made official in late March 2000, but Dreamworks decided to put the movie aside to make Shrek and Madagascar. In August 2008, it was reported that DreamWorks Animation's former co-head of production Cecil Kramer, who shepherded Tusker at the studio for 6 years, brought the project to Hong Kong and Los Angeles-based animation company Imagi Animation Studios. Brooke Breton was to produce this new version of the film from a screenplay by Ted Talley. An early 2011 release was scheduled that same month. However, following the box office failure of Imagi's Astro Boy, Tusker was again cancelled on February 5, 2010 as the animation studio shut down. A fourth Roger Rabbit cartoon based on Who Framed Roger Rabbit was planned for release in 1995 to coincide with the release of Toy Story, preceding that proposed feature film of the process, where this short has Roger Rabbit working as a waiter in a fancy restaurant, only for his antics to continually anger the manager. But it was cancelled after pre-production ended and before production could begin, and replaced in the gap with a reissue of Roller Coaster Rabbit. This cartoon was supposed to be followed by 3 more Roger Rabbit shorts, also starring Baby Herman, Clean and Oppressed, Beach Blanket Bay and Bronco Busted Bunny, but all were cancelled as a result of the deteriorating relationship between Disney and Amblin. The Little Blue Whale was a planned film that was to be directed by Don Bluth. Described as an underwater Bambi, the plot follows a blue whale calf who is left orphaned after his mother is killed by whalers. He eventually befriends a sea turtle who, along with some animal friends, dedicate themselves to finding a new family for him, while protecting him from his mother's killers. But the film became stalled when famed screenwriter Robert Townshend Chinatown said he would have to write the final script. Town would then spend several years working with Jack Nicholson on the Chinatown sequel, The Two Jakes, which went on and off again for several years. Finally, in the late 80s, Sullivan Bluth Studios dropped the idea and gave the project fully to Town, so the film was left in the deep blue sea. However, Don Bluth would later return to his idea for a story about a whale in 2024 with Yuki, Star of the Sea. Hoodwinked III, in the Vigo was meant to be the 3rd installment of the franchise, but it was scrapped due to the disappointing negative reaction and box office bomb of the sequel, Hoodwinked II, Hood vs. Evil. The Road to El Dorado 2 was a planned sequel to the 2000 Dreamworks animated film The Road to El Dorado. The plot would have Miguel, Julio, and Chell set off to a new adventure. But the sequel never happened, as the first movie bombed at the box office and Dreamworks abandoned 2D traditional animation in favor of CGI animation following the box office failure of Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas in 2003. Frady Cat is an action comedy film, directed by John Musker and Ron Clements that planned to be set for release in 2009. It was to have been a satire of Alfred Hitchcock's film noirs, where Oscar, a cat, and Corina, a cockatoo, are pampered, spoiled house pets that live an easy life. However, when a neighbor's pet is kidnapped and Oscar is the main suspect, the two must set off on an intriguing mission to find out who the real culprit is so that they can clear Oscar's name. The movie began production in 2004, under the direction of Musker and Clements, with Andres Dea, Harold Sieperman, and Hans Bacher handling character and background designs. The initial story reel was presented in May of that year, and although many of the animators were impressed with it, David Stainton would not agree to release the movie. This was because he did not think that it would be able to be marketed to a general audience, on account of average people, especially children, were not well versed in Hitchcock's films. Where Jim Hill states this, and this time around, these empty suits chose to badmouth Frady Cat, saying that the premise of the picture was far too obscure. I mean, who today even remembers who Alfred Hitchcock was? So why kids in 2009 pay good money to see an animated film that pays tribute to an old, fat, dead movie director? So David Stainton refused to greenlight the project and the film was scrapped. Madagascar 4 was supposed to be the 4th and possibly final installment in the Madagascar franchise, where the plot would start to probably focus around Alex, Marty, Melman, Gloria, and the rest of the gang learning that they all belong in different places and searching for their own destinies in the final and emotional installment in this saga. However, production was halted when En Globe stated that it was too early to tell. It was removed from its May 18, 2018 release date. There is currently not that much information about the cancellation reasons, except that the producers thought it was too early to tell if they should have a 4th film in the franchise, and is due to the spin-off film Penguins of Madagascar and their performance at the box office along with Rise of the Guardians, Turbo, Mr. Peabody, and Sherman, and Home, forcing a massive write-down for the studio despite all the positive receptions from those 4 films got from critics. Pacific Data Images shut down in 2015 and terminated over 500 Dreamworks employees. And the fact that NBC Universal brought Dreamworks in 2016 and the restructuring of the studios, well, let's just say, that the franchise should take a break for now and would someday return. In 2005, in an interview with the Australian newspaper Sydney Morning Herald, Robots director Chris Wedge considered making a sequel to the film due to the film's success at the box office. The film's producer William Joyce also considered making a sequel to this movie, but it is unknown why the sequel never went through. It may be due to Blue Sky Studios could be focusing on the Ice Age franchise. Well, maybe. Zodiac was a planned computer-animated film that was going to be made by Dreamworks Animation and Oriental Dreamworks. It was planned to be released sometime in 2014, where an anthropomorphic kitty in a modern society with anthropomorphic animals tries to make sure he becomes the first cat on the Chinese zodiac, while also discovering a sinister conspiracy. But due to problems at Oriental Dreamworks, the project was scrapped. King of the Elves was a film set to be released by Walt Disney Animation Studios. It was based on a short story fantasy by Philip K. Dick and originally planned to be directed by Aaron Blaise and produced by John Lasseter and Chuck Williams. The film was about a band of elves and one dwarf living in the Mississippi Delta who name a local human, Calder, their king after he helps save them from an evil troll. Originally slated for release in 2012, the film was reportedly shelved in December 2009. In 2010, it was reportedly back in development and set to be released in 2012 with Chris Williams, who co-directed Bolt, set to direct. It soon rivaled Frozen for a 2013 release because production was going so well, but production eventually stalled due to story problems, and Williams started helping other current film projects on the side. Despite the original Disney film being permanently cancelled, it is possible that another studio will one day bring it back to life. Space Jam 2. After the success of Space Jam in 1996, a sequel called Space Jam 2 was being planned by Warner Brothers in 1997. In the return of Joe Pytka as director of the sequel and Spike Brandt and Tony Servone as animation supervisors. The film would have the Looney Tunes face a new villain named Berserko in a new basketball competition, but Michael Jordan did not agree to participate and star in the sequel. And according to Bob Camp, a producer lead to design artist, saying that Michael Jordan signed on to keep development going, so the sequel was scrapped. Golf Jam. Around the time Space Jam 2 was in development. In the 1990s, Warner Brothers announced that a potential sequel to Space Jam, titled Golf Jam, was in the works. This would have more likely see the Looney Tunes and golfer Tiger Woods competing other golfers. Where the director of Space Jam approached Spike Lee to help him write the script for Golf Jam. Other than that, development details are scarce. That's why in an interview with the original director of Space Jam, Joe Pytka, in 2016, he said the idea felt quite dumb, which led it to be shelved. Spy Jam. Deadline reported that Warner Brothers stated that there was a possible follow-up to Space Jam. The film would have involved Bugs Bunny. Some years later, after the events of Space Jam, working alongside Jackie Chan's character as secret spy agents attempting to prevent a villainous scheme. But Jackie Chan did not want to be in the film after finding out about the storylines. And so the film was cancelled but became the basis for Looney Tunes, Back in Action. Race Jam. In the 1990s, Warner Brothers announced that a potential sequel to the original Space Jam, titled Race Jam, was in the works. Not much is known about the film's development, as information has been scarce ever since it was announced. Skate Jam. Skate Jam was a planned sequel to Space Jam, starring the Looney Tunes characters with Tony Hawk guest starring, where Tony Hawk was called to work on the film, accepting the proposal. In an Instagram live stream, Tony revealed that after the initial call, he never received another one. Well, the reason why it's because the movie, along with Race Jam, were cancelled due to the box office failure of Looney Tunes, Back in Action. With these attempts scrapped, the Looney Tunes will never appear in a feature film again until in 2021. With Space Jam, a new legacy with LeBron James replacing Michael Jordan as the lead human role. However, Michael Jordan does get a mention, but it's only because actor Michael B. Jordan appears instead of the basketball player.
Come on, man. That's Michael B. Jordan, the actor.
I was just getting some popcorn and then this cat grabbed me. We couldn't get Michael A. Jordan, so we got Michael B. Jordan? How could you think he was his Ernest? They look nothing alike.
It's been 25 years. I thought he aged gracefully.
But upon release, the film received negative reviews and bombed at the box office. The Smurfs 3 is a proposed third installment in the live-action Smurfs franchise. The announcement was made about 2 weeks after The Smurfs 2 was released in theaters. It was originally set for a release in 2015, as the film was possibly going to have the Smurfs be in a different time period. But it was cancelled, as Jonathan Winters, the voice actor of Papa Smurf, died of natural causes on April 11, 2013 before the second film was made. The first 2 Smurfs movies were panned by critics and audiences despite the first film being a box office success, but the sequel got underperformed at the box office, which almost compared to its predecessor. Due to this, in 2014, Sony announced they would not be proceeding with a third live-action film. Instead, they opted for a completely computer-animated reboot, which this third film became Smurfs: The Lost Village. In the year 1998, when Pixar was wrapping up production for their second movie, A Bug's Life, Jorgen Klubin wrote a script for a film called The Yellow Car, and was about an electric car in a gas-guzzling world inspired by the story called The Ugly Duckling. Some of the characters and concept art were made in 1998. They also said that it could be the next film after A Bug's Life and released in 1999. But it was scrapped as John Lasseter thought that it wasn't strong to support an animated movie, so Toy Story to become the next Pixar film after A Bug's Life, and elements from this film have been carried to the successor. The 2006 film, Cars. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 3 was a proposed sequel to Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. It would have been a future installment in the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs franchise, where the plot would be set after the events of the second film. A day after the second film's release, Cody Cameron discussed the possibility of a third film, saying, "I don't know that will happen. We're going to have to see what it does on September 27th. I definitely think we're set up enough character. Basically enough stuff in the second film that we can branch off and do multiple stories for a third film, but you know it's kind of hard to think about that right now." On August 14, 2013, Cody Cameron tweeted on Twitter an idea for a third film was already in the works, but there were no more updates on the film as the Sony hack is going on. It wouldn't be until on January 13, 2014. Cody Cameron responded to a question on Twitter that the sequel was no longer going to happen, at least not in the rainy future. And around this time, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the people who directed the first movie, were busy working on the Lego Movie, but the franchise did receive a prequel series on Cartoon Network. In September 2023, Phil Lord stated that a script was completed for a third installment before the 2023 Writers Guild of American strike, entitled Planet of the Grapes, which was a direct reference to Planet of the Apes. Later, in April 2024, an Investor Day presentation from Sony is released. This presentation mentions this movie. Those two indicate that this movie might will be revived, be in early development, or that Sony Pictures Animation still has plans to do another one. In the late 1990s, presumably 1991, Pacific Data Images announced a pitch for CGI film that was in the works, titled Bugs, Lights Out, which now became the film Ants. It tells the story about microscopic insect-like robots who were responsible for the entropy of electronics and machinery. In the 1990s, the late Pacific Data Images shopped around multiple pitches for a computer-animated film, one of which they stirred with a collaboration from Dreamworks, Bugs, Lights Out. The film was to be directed by PDI's founder Carl Rosendahl. Rex Grignan had this to say: "Bugs, Lights Out was quite a different story than what Ants ended up being. But the point really was that all you could do then was hard-body characters. So, it was bugs, robots, and toys. And Pixar had already done Tin Toy, and there was tons of robot stuff going on at the time. So we were sort of thinking, what's another way we could do that? And our Bugs was a combination of bugs and robots. We did an animated test of this character called Smack. It was actually animated and voiced by Glenn McQueen, who later went to Pixar. McQueen passed away in 2002. We showed that test around all the studios, and we had a lot of studios very interested in the idea, but it was before Toy Story, so nobody bid on producing on a feature film at that point, but what it meant was we were thrilled when Toy Story Go funded. We were like, okay, this is it. Finally, something's unlocked that. The test we did was maybe a 10 or 15-second test of this character doing a little monologue. Glenn did this great voice on it. At that point, we had what I thought was some cool technology. We got to where we could do some pretty sophisticated rigging, and we'd come up with a way to do bendable surfaces that was pretty revolutionary at the time, and we were using it on some of the commercial work, but the pitch didn't get picked up. Noted that Grignon left PDI to work at Pixar in 1995 on Toy Story, and later at the beginning of production of A Bug's Life, he would return to PDI once Ants had been greenlit. With the idea scrapped, Pacific Data Images was picked up by Dreamworks Animation to instead make Ants in 1995 through 1998 for its release, where it received mixed reviews regarding the amount of cringe jokes surrounding most scenes, but the nice animation of the film is right down the tie good. After the release of the 2017 film My Little Pony, the movie Lionsgate announced that there were plans for a sequel, but it was cancelled as My Little Pony Friendship is Magic series ended in 2019. However, they produced a new film titled My Little Pony: A New Generation, which is set years after the events of Friendship is Magic. It was released on September 24, 2021 on Netflix. Dumbo 2 was the official sequel to Dumbo that would have Robert C. Ramirez, the director of Joseph, King of Dreams, at the helm, where sometime after the events of the first Dumbo, Timothy Q. Mouse meet a series of other baby animals that are going through different childhood stages and wind up getting lost in New York City. While the animals try to find their way back home, each character would find out to fix their problems. In addition, it would provide an explanation on what happened to Dumbo's father, Mr. Jumbo. The film is scheduled to be released in 2001. However, production was delayed many times and was cancelled in 2006 after John Lasseter was named CEO of Walt Disney Animation Studios. The only pieces of evidence that are open to the public are a trailer that was shown on the 2001 VHS and DVD release of the Dumbo 60th Anniversary Edition. A scene and storyboards from the unfinished film. It's a big shame that the film is shelved, most likely indefinitely. The early draft for the first Tinker Bell film, alternatively titled Tinker Bell and the Ring of Belief, is a promotional material designed Tinker Bell and her friends traveling to the mainland to restore the children's belief in fairies. In addition, the film would also show how Tinker Bell met Peter Pan and encountered a young girl from an orphanage in London. Captain Hook, the pirates, and the Lost Boys were also planned to be featured in the film as key factors. Trailers of the original film were included in several Disney releases, with the initial release date being 2007, but due to budget constraints and the film being deemed virtually unwatchable, the script underwent many rewrites and 90% of the complete prototype film is scrapped. The film ended up being delayed to 2008 with an entirely new storyline. Meet the Robinsons 2. First Date is the sequel to Disney's 2007 animated feature film Meet the Robinsons, originally scheduled for a 2009 release, where the plot would have explored further into Cornelius Robinson's life, but despite receiving positive reviews, the original film performed poorly at the box office, so Disney did not have enough money to make the sequel. However, there was a short titled Pet Project that was intended for the film's DVD release. In a 6-minute short entailing the story of how Bowler Hat Guy was able to retrieve, raise and train a giant dinosaur to ravage against Lewis. Progress was slightly swindled when Ed Catmull said that he didn't want the studio to devote Amy more time with creating extra shorts for DVD releases because they don't pay for themselves, and it was eventually cancelled after the second draft animatic was completed. The Aristocats 2 is an animated film that was to have been a sequel to the 1970 Disney film The Aristocats, as it was scheduled to be released in 2008, where the story was meant to center around Marie, Duchess' daughter, who becomes smitten by another kitten aboard a luxury cruise ship. However, she and her family must soon take on a jewel thief on the open seas. But a year before last, in 2006, Disney announced discontinuation of all made-for-video sequels when John Lasseter became CEO of Walt Disney Studios. So the film was never made and is locked away in the Disney vault. In April 2015, it was publicly announced that Warner Bros., then Dreamworks Animation, were making a film based off the beloved game series Plants vs. Zombies, with Roy Lee attached as a producer through his production, Vertigo Entertainment, where according to Rich Werner the plot is a human ate some contaminated hot dogs while visiting the carnival with his family, then he became a zombie and began to infect everyone. Because of this portion being revealed, it is not known if Crazy Dave was going to be important to the main story. Then in April 2022, Werner revealed that a Plants vs. Zombies animated feature film was previously pitched to Dreamworks Animation, with a full script reading and a room full of concept art by Peter Zaslav, with Werner listing out what the intended plot of the film had been in an interview that May, but due to management issues and scheduling conflicts, the film was cancelled, and Plants vs. Zombies remains as a game series. Nude is a Pixar Animation Studios film. Pixar and Walt Disney Studios announced the project in 2008, where it would have been Pixar Animation Studios' 14 animated film and was to be released in 2012, before being replaced with Brave, where a pair of blue-footed newts, Nude and Brooke, are the last remaining male and female of their kind on the planet, forced together by science to save the species. The problem is they can't stand each other. The pair soon find themselves on a perilous, unpredictable adventure and discover that finding a mate never goes as planned, even when you only have no choice. But the film was completely scrapped as the film's plot is too similar to Rio and Rango. In a March 2014 interview, Pixar president Ed Catmull stated that Newt was an idea that was not working in pre-production. When the project was passed to Pete Docter, the director of Up, he pitched an idea that Pixar thought was better, and that concept became Inside Out. And as of 2014, the film was cancelled and replaced with Inside Out. In 2016, on a Reddit Alma, a fan asked Jerry Seinfeld if he would star in a B-movie sequel. But Jerry Seinfeld refused to star in the sequel, as although the original movie received mixed reviews from critics and audiences, it failed at the box office. His reply says, "I considered it this spring for a solid 6 hours. There's a fantastic energy now for some reason, on the internet particularly. Tumblr, people brought my attention to. I actually did consider it, but then I realized it would make B-movie one less iconic. But my kids want me to do it, a lot of people want me to do it. A lot of people that don't know what animation is want me to do it. If you have any idea what animation is, you'll never do it." In April 2006, Dreamworks Animation had the rights to develop a computer-animated film adaptation of the children's book of the same name, Punk Farm, by Jarrett J. Krosichka. It would have been produced by Kevin Messick and written by Jim Hecht, while the plot is unknown, but it would have the same plot as the book, but it was cancelled for unknown reasons. But the project eventually got picked up by MGM Animation. Originally Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie would be released in theaters as a cinematography film and the sequel, follow-up to the Season 5 episode Parents' Day. But also it will be a sequel to Hey Arnold, the movie. The plot follows Arnold traveling to San Lorenzo to discover the whereabouts of his parents Miles and Stella. This would be the same as the 2017 film but with changes. But Hey Arnold, the movie was a box office bomb when released in theaters on June 28, 2002. Causing the original version of the Jungle movie to be cancelled and leaving Hey Arnold on an unresolved cliffhanger for years, until 13 years later. In 2025, it was announced by Nickelodeon that the Jungle movie would finally be made, but this time it would be released on television instead. It premiered on Nickelodeon on November 24, 2017 and received a positive reception from fans and critics. Fox Animation Studios was originally working on a traditionally animated drama movie set in the Ice Age, where it was going to be produced by Don Bluth, but the studio was shut down a few days later after the release and box office failure of Titan, which caused production to be moved to Blue Sky Studios. With the film eventually changed into a CGI animated film and was released in 2002, certain aspects of the film were changed in the 2002 version, and was directed by Chris Wedge. Tortoise vs. Hare was going to be a stop-motion animated film from Aardman Animation and Dreamworks Animation and was going to be directed by Richard Glishovsky. The movie was going to be released in 2003 but possibly 2004. In October 1999, Aardman announced they were developing a film adaptation of the Aesop fable, The Tortoise and the Hare, with Dreamworks, as the plot would be about the tortoise and the hare competing each other in a running race. But in July 2001, it was announced that they had postponed production on the film as they continued to rework the script. Bob Hoskins, Orlando Jones, Brenda Blethyn, and Lee Evans were set to voice the characters. Kerry Kirkpatrick and Mark Burton were writing the script, though more writers were expected to be brought on to revamp the script. Peter Lord and Nick Park were slated to be executive producers, while Richard Galishofsky would serve as director. So the film was put off to a complete halt later that month. Spokesman Arthur Sheriff said Chicken Run was in development for 2.5 years, but we've had just 16 months on Tortoise. We hate to make all these people redundant, but it means we will be able to flesh out the characters more and make a better film. No further updates were given until June 2012. A source told Ain't It Cool News, "It's meltdown time, serious script issues, and an unholy mess of a film. It's amazing that it got as far as it did. The alarm bells should have started ringing months ago when various voice talents came and went, and intricate sets were being built and promptly trashed without being filmed. What a waste." So the film's production was shut down and later cancelled after failing to rework the story. Bambi's Children was a planned sequel to Walt Disney's 1942 animated feature film Bambi and based on the novel of the same title, as the film would have dealt with Bambi's adult life and his relationship with his newfound family shortly after he becomes the new great prince of the forest. But it was shelved. The most likely reason would be because Bambi did not perform very well due to being released during World War II. This ultimately cost its box office returns. Another reason could be Walt Disney himself did not believe in producing sequels, though he was willing to make exceptions with some of his live-action films, like Old Yeller. While the film was never made, Dell Comics published a Walt Disney Productions comics adaptation in 1943. In 2006, a direct-to-video sequel, Bambi 2, was released. However, this film serves as a midquel rather than a direct follow-up, as it chronicles Bambi's childhood and relationship with his father, the great prince of the forest, who takes him in shortly after his mother is killed by hunters. Brian Pimentel, who directed the midquel, intended to direct a third film focusing on Bambi's adulthood, but this was shelved when John Lasseter put an end to the company's direct-to-video sequel business. Sonic Armageddon was a planned film by the late Ben Hurst, writer of Sonic, the animated series, and Sonic Underground alongside Ken Penders, the writer of Sonic Archie comics, based on the Saturday morning cartoon, Sonic the Hedgehog, which in turn was based on the video game series. It was proposed to Sega in 2003 and was set to be distributed by Dreamworks Pictures. From the looks of the storyboards, it looks like the film would be about Mobius exploding, so it would likely serve as a continuation to the Sonic the Hedgehog Saturday morning animated series. Unfortunately, Sega was already busy with the new Sonic television series. Sonic X Dreamworks has no interest in this project. And Ken Penders, in an act of sabotage, told Sega that Hurst was trying to co-opt the franchise, which is of course a lie. This caused the company to fire Hurst from the project and allowed Penders to rewrite his own story based on the Archie version, and pitched it to Sega before being dropped in 2007, due to massive corporate upheaval according to Penders, as well as the death of Sega of America licensing manager Robert Leffler, who was supportive of Penders' idea, and the project was never seen the light of day. Beauty and the Beast was a planned adaptation of the fairy tale of the same name that was to be directed by Don Bluth, where a young girl is kept in the house of a prince that transformed into a hideous beast in order to preserve her father's freedom. During her stay, they learned that something must be loved before it is lovable. The villain would be an evil queen named Livia, but work on the film was interrupted by production on An American Tale and The Land Before Time. And in late 1986, Disney announced the studio would be working on a version of their own, which had begun full production in 1989 and was slated for a 1991 release. Knowing his version could not be completed before Disney's, Don dropped the project. After Don canceled his plans for a film adaptation, Disney released an animated version of their own in 1991 and was a box office hit. Snow White Returns was a proposed sequel short to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In this short, the Seven Dwarfs receive a message from Snow White that reads that she will be making a visit to their cottage. But the cancellation reasons are unknown, though this has to do with Walt Disney's alleged negative opinions on sequels of their own movies, and the production was affected by World War II. Despite the cancellation, the unmade short can be found on the Diamond Edition release of Snow White. Fantasia 2006 is a sequel to the 1999 film Fantasia 2000. The film was going to be like Fantasia 2000 and have other musical scores and newer animated segments. But Fantasia 2000 flopped at the box office, and Disney momentarily stopped making traditionally animated movies after Home on the Range in 2004, so it was immediately scrapped. But as for the shorts, they were to be shown in the film were released separately. Nimona was a planned film that was supposed to come out on January 14, 2022. Based on N.D. Stevenson's science fantasy webcomic of the same name, the film was going to be directed by Patrick Osborne and written by Mark Hames. This version would be the same as the webcomic and the eventual released Netflix version, where the film was an adaptation of a webcomic of the same name that was in production at the Blue Sky Studios. Nimona was reportedly 75% complete by the time Disney shut down production. At this time, the film was later picked up by Annapurna and DNEG and would be planned to be released by Netflix. Some time before, some materials of the Nimona film itself had apparently been leaked in publications on some platforms, publications that remain deleted to this day. On July 14, 2021, some materials and footage of the unfinished film were uploaded to YouTube, which is no longer available. But a new version of the YouTube test footage for the film can be found, which due to Blue Sky Studios closing down on April 10, 2021. Though Disney still maintains the rights to Blue Sky's library and occasionally use their properties. Disney's involvement in Florida's controversial Don't Say Gay bill and lack of criticism from CEO Bob Chapek until after the bill had passed, 3 former Blue Sky staff members stated the film received pushback from Disney leadership, centered around the film's LGBT themes and a same-sex kiss. So the film rights were later picked up by Netflix, and it resulted in the 2023 film being produced by Annapurna Animation and distributed by Netflix. The original version of Disney's 2021 film Encanto featured lots of deleted characters, scenes, animals, rooms, casita designs, creative ideas, and vehicles we never got to see and were scrapped in the final version of the film, where development was wild, with endless and millions of changes being made, with the plot being the exact same as the finished film. But the writers said most of the ideas were not too attractive, and many changes were made as the writers and scripters didn't like most of the ideas, so Lin-Manuel Miranda, the songwriter for all the songs, decided to make some minor changes on each concept. So the old version with the original elements were scrapped, and the current Encanto was released in 2021 to critical acclaim. In March 2011, Dreamworks announced they were producing an animated adaptation of the book My Unwilling Witch, aka the Rumblewick Letters, that would be titled Rumblewick. Tim Johnson and Jim Herzfeld were slated to write and direct the project, where Rumblewick is a witch's cat with one big problem. His witch, Haggy Aggie, doesn't want to be a witch anymore. She wants to be a regular girl and do regular girl things, like marry a prince. How can he persuade her that witchy ways are best? However, Dreamworks cancelled the animated film around 2011 because it couldn't find a beer after the studio wrote it off on their taxes due to studio politics and restructuring. While the project came very close to production, it was caught up in a larger decision that led to the film being cancelled as well, and the high cost of resuming production prevented it from moving forward. In September 2016, Brenda Chapman revealed she had worked on the project, saying, "I helped develop a project called Rumblewick, which was based on a children's book. It was so much fun and it was hard to leave it behind when I did." So the conclusion of many cancelled animated films we looked at remains unwritten, as these projects never reached completion. However, common themes and reasons often mark their ending. 1. Creative differences. Many projects ended due to disagreements between directors and studios over the creative direction, leading to a halt in production. 2. Corporate restructuring or mergers. Changes in company ownership or strategy often result in the shelving of projects not aligned with new goals. as seen with Dreamworks' cancellation of Larrikins. 3. Financial concerns. Budget overruns or concerns about profitability can lead studios to cancel projects before they are finished. And finally, 4. Shifts in market trends. Changing audience interests or advancements in technology sometimes render original concepts outdated or unappealing, leading to their cancellation. These factors contribute to the untimely end of many animated films, leaving them as intriguing what could have been stories in the animation industry.
Alright guys, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time around. See you later, and bye bye.